Broadcasting into the multiverse, from dimensions unknown, this is Cryptocast with Ray Doherty. Hello and welcome to Cryptocast Mystery Radio. I'm Ray Doherty. This is episode 1 of season 2 of Tales from the Past. Thanks for joining me as we travel back in time and reading mysterious accounts of everything from cryptids to strange lights in the night sky in newspapers from days past. Thanks to the National Library of Australia and their website, trove.nla.gov.au. Now, if you like what we do, please consider subscribing to Cryptocast here on this channel or on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I would really appreciate it. In this episode, we find out about the Murilla Creek Creature in 1867 that scared 17 road workers. We look into the Wyoila Creek Encounter in 1905, and then we fast forward to 1925 to find out about the wild man of Cox's River. Plus, we have another tidbit or two to share, so stick around as we travel back in time. Today's first story is about the Murilla Creek Creature, a story from the Kiama and Shoalhaven Advertiser on January 3rd, 1867. Now, Murilla is in Queensland, not far from Chinchilla, about 525 k's northwest of Brisbane. Today, some 153 years later, I have been unable to locate the exact place where this took place, as the roads that were created back then may have since made way for national highways, which is sad because having that location of these events provides better context when recounting the story. But let's kick on with the story, because it's an interesting one, from 1867. It's titled, Strange Animal. For 2 years past, a strange animal has been occasionally seen by people in the bush near Murilla Mountain, and have been given descriptions of the creature, so we have been doubtful of reports and fancied that the animal was nothing more or less than an old wallaroo. As the locality of Murilla is very wild and rocky, and the wallaroo is found in such abundance, but within the last 2 days, 2 people have seen the creature, which has caused much alarm in the camp of stonebreakers and road makers, some 16 or 17 in number. It is described as being 3 foot 6 inches high, standing on its hind legs. Its forelegs or arms could touch the ground. It was covered in shaggy black hair all over it, and it made the most horrible yelling noise when the parties rode upon the direction of the rock that the creature was standing on, showing a very fine set of teeth. It made a spring at its disruptors, who put their spurs to their horses and fled. The indigenous people of the district are aware of these animals and state that they were once in great numbers some time ago. The place this creature was seen is one of the wildest places that could be found on the northern line of the road at the back of Murilla Mountain, or as it's generally called, the Merlot. This creature evidently belongs to the ape type. Good little short one to start. A couple of key points. If a wallaroo stands upright on its hind legs, its arms cannot touch the ground. Wallaroos can come in black, but wallaroos have short hair, not shaggy hair. A wallaroo doesn't scream at people, nor does it have very fine big teeth. Clearly, this is not a wallaroo, in my opinion. What do you think? Do you think it was a wallaroo that screams horribly with a fine set of teeth and stands on its hind legs with its arms can still touch the ground? 3 foot 6 though. It's interesting. It's very small. I mean, it is what we call Junjuddy size, which is the name that we give to describe the smaller Yowies sightings that have occurred, but they range from anywhere from 3 to 4.5, 5 feet tall. So what do you think this was? Do you think they saw a wallaroo? So that was out of the norm? Or do you think it was a Yowie? Either way, it scared the workers. And when they went to ride up on it, it screamed and they ran away fearing for their lives by the sound of it. An interesting one to start, but again, as I said in the story, it's very hard to find details on this location. You can find a rough area, but unfortunately, any of those old roads that were made back in those days are gone because there's highways that run through it everywhere. And it's pretty flat ground, so the mountain, there are a couple of, you could call them mountains, I suppose. I tend to refer to them as, they look more like hills to me, not compared to what we have in other places. But there are some nonetheless, but to pin down an exact area, unfortunately, is not very easy to do. But an interesting story nonetheless, and as I said, 1867, 153 years ago, long time ago. Food for thought, which is a good one to start. Our second story is titled The Wild Man of Cox's River. This is from the Richmond River Herald, titled March 10, 1925, page 1, but it was originally published in the Blue Mountain Echo. It reads, Last weekend, a party set forth seeking game in foxes and rabbits on the banks of the Cox's River, says the Blue Mountain Echo. They did not experience much luck with the game, but saw an apparition which completely destroyed their night's rest and made them wonder if the crystal water of the river did not possess intoxicating qualities. The party had reached the foot of a well-known mountain in the valley of Megalong, in the vicinity of the river, when suddenly a form leapt from a tree and sped swiftly into the serenity of the neighbouring scrub. It was absolutely nude, with hair a yard in length streaming from its head. The visitors scarcely had time to ascertain the apparition was a well-formed man, about 6 foot in height, with a hairy torso, before it vanished into the shadows of the undergrowth. Investigations revealed the track of a huge splore foot with toes set wide apart, as is the manner of men unaccustomed in wearing boots. There were several prints of the foot in sandy patches, and the party agreed that the foot was abnormally large even for a 6-foot man. What is the explanation of this mystery can only be a matter of conjecture, but for the evidence of 4 reputable eyewitnesses cannot be dismissed lightly. There can be no doubt that naked man did leap from the tree and vanish into the bush. He may be some unfortunate whose head is affected and is subsisting on rabbits and spoils from handy potato patches and cabbage plots. On the other hand, that apparition may have been a fossicker who was indulging in sunbathing and felt the natural tinglings of modesty upon hearing human voices. Now, a footnote to that story, it just ends like that. Footnote, the Cox's River sits at an elevation of 1,040 metres, and it's part of the Hawkesbury Nepean river systems of New South Wales. Truly a beautiful part of Australia. Now, what did you think of that story? A couple of interesting points. If he was a normal person, why didn't the story just say so rather than refer to him simply as a naked man or as an apparition? That was a common phrase they used back then for things or people they could not readily identify, but they didn't say it was an animal either. The second point is they said it was a naked man covered with hair a yard long from the head and a hairy torso. Again, how many people in those days allowed themselves to become so uncouth? Living in the bush? Yes, it happened often. There were lots of hermits, or however you'd like to describe them, as bushmen, living out there, and then they had big beards and they had long hair. But a hairy body? That noticeable? Third point, abnormally large footprints found nearby. A splore foot, or as they described it, or as we call today, a splay foot, is a designation that in the Yowie research have come to know as a very, very familiar sign of these creatures. Very wide ball, very narrow heel, a splay foot with toes sit out on their own. In human feet, however, it's considered a deformity. So did they see a Yowie, or was it a rough living settler with deformed feet? That's up to you. It's a very, very interesting story. Now, our third and final story today is a fascinating one. It is a little tough to read, so please bear with me. And it's a very, very interesting story from the Delegate Argus and Border Post of New South Wales, Saturday, 3rd of June, 1905, page 2. Now, this occurred at a place, I'm guessing it's a suburb or a locality. It's very difficult, again, to find any information on, around a place called Ballura, Beloura. Now, that is part of the Marouba, Marouba, Mourouba County, which is part of Cobar Shire. So it's right out there in central western New South Wales. It is known for its mining, in some parts desolate, some parts open, some parts very bushy. And this occurred near a creek. So let's have a listen to this story. It goes on a little bit, but let's have a listen. At various times for many years past, says the Southern Star, different people have vowed to seeing an animal resembling a hairy man in the mountains and almost unknown country around Ballura. The late C.J. Byrne, who frequented these parts, purported to have seen the strange animal, as did also a man who was employed by Mr. Cowdrey of Bega. The local indigenous people in these days spoke of such a thing and were always very frightened when in the vicinity of what is known as Wyoila Creek. Now comes the story that 4 persons, Mr. J. Wall, Harry Staples, Mr. J. L. Wall, and W. Roberts, who are employed by Mr. Cowdrey, have seen the monstrosity. 3 of the persons named belong to Bega, and they have addressed the following letter to this paper. While exploring on Sunday, May 7th, we saw a strange-looking animal, just like a hairy man, run out of some rocks and along a beaten track, leaving a foot track similar to a man's. The footmarks were about 14 inches long, and the animal appeared to be 7 foot high, with tremendously long arms reaching to below its knees. When it got about 100 yards away, it stood and did not appear to be frightened, but after a while walked away gently into the direction of Wyoila Creek Mountains. None of us tried to hinder it, as it looked too fierce, and the dogs refused to go near it, crouching at our feet instead. This is the story. The strange thing is about these hairy men is that no one has ever captured one. Although men are quite capable of capturing lions, tigers, and other wild animals, there should be a fortune in it for a man who will bring the hairy man along, dead or alive. Now, that is a very, very interesting story from a really, really rough sort of terrain area. Perhaps back in those days, 1905, so what's that, 115 years ago. There's a similar area in Queensland that I know of that geographically is very similar to that region, and the hairy man does live up there. So what did you think of that? 7 foot tall, hands down below its knees. I think it's pretty clear, and it left footprints. Over the course of this next season of Tales from the Past, we have quite a few interesting stories where people actually, from this time period, took plaster casts and had doctors look at them, medical practitioners or scientists look at them, and even people. And if you're familiar with the old cameras of that period, you know, the old box where they had the flash, they had to hold the powdered flash to get the exposure whilst opening the shutter. One fellow talks about how he finds it very, very difficult to get a photo. We struggle with modern equipment, let alone with equipment from those days. This is a fascinating story, and more stories of these to come in Season 2 of Tales from the Past. But what did you think of this? What did you think of the story from Wyoila Creek out towards Incobar area? That's pretty rough country out there. If you know anything about Wyoila Creek, or if you know anything about the region, I'd love to know. Please let me know in the comments, or drop us a line through our Facebook page at Cryptocast, or you can reach us on Instagram as well. I'm not on Twitter, don't do Twitter, but you can certainly reach us on any of those places and let us know, or just leave comments below here. And don't forget, you can get Cryptocast not only here on our YouTube channel, but also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Well, that's all we have time for today in Episode 1 of Season 2 of Cryptocast. Thanks for joining me. Stay well, and we'll talk again soon.